Okay, so today we're going to, this is basically going to be a video that's going over the group questions that were asked, just because we ran out of time in class and I wanted to make sure I did actually answer them. So the first question was asking, can a producer of a good have an absolute advantage as well as a comparative advantage? So it's a really good question. And the answer is yes. So in this example here, we can see that we have Mateo and Sophia. So Mateo can wash 2 cars or mow 1 lawn. Sophia can wash 3 cars or mow 1 lawn. So this table right here is looking at who has the absolute advantage. So we can see that Sophia has the absolute advantage in car washing, whereas neither individual has an absolute advantage in lawn mowing. So when we take a comparative advantage approach, though, we can see that Mateo actually has the comparative advantage in lawn mowing, whereas Sophia has the comparative advantage in car washing. So just kind of important to note that, yes, an individual can have an absolute advantage and a comparative advantage in the same good. So Sophia has an absolute advantage in her ability to wash cars, and she has a comparative advantage in car washing. So the next question was asking about kind of taxation in the impact that that has on consumer and producer surplus. So the first thing to remember is that let's say that we have a tax on producers. So that's going to shift up the supply curve. So this is our new supply curve. And this difference between this right here and this right here, that is the amount of the tax. So we can see that this is the price that consumers are paying for the good, and this is the price that sellers are receiving for the good. And this is our old equilibrium price. So now I've colored in all of the different either surpluses or deadweight loss. So we can see that this is the consumer surplus after tax. This is the producer surplus after tax. This is the deadweight loss. And then this is the government revenue. So someone also asked, kind of building on that, what is the tax burden on consumers? So the consumer tax burden is actually going to be this chunk right here. So basically the lost consumer surplus, that's the consumer tax burden. And then the producer tax burden is going to be this right here. So the difference between the old equilibrium price and the new price that sellers receive. So that's the difference in the burden sharing. Okay. The next question someone had was about patents, which is actually a really, really good question. So patents are basically designed to help solve the externality problem from technology spillover. So basically, all that's really saying is that by giving inventors exclusive use of their inventions for a period of time, the inventor can capture some of the economic benefits of the invention, because otherwise, if there wasn't a patent, then the inventors wouldn't be able to benefit from their invention because someone else could just copy it. So that's kind of why patents are designed. Okay. Another example that someone had asked to do was to go over why tariffs can be preferred, or why some individuals in a domestic economy will prefer tariffs. So a good example is to look at this. So we have the world price here as the pink line, and the world price plus tariff here as the orange line. So importantly, you can see that the world price plus tariff is higher than the original world price. So domestic producers prefer tariffs because this chunk right here, that is actually a gain in producer surplus in a loss to consumers. So this chunk right here is basically saying, domestic producers gain from tariffs because it raises the price of the good above the world price, and consumers lose because they're paying more for that good. Okay, and just really quickly, someone also did ask kind of why a government would choose a quota versus a tariff. So just remember, for quotas, they're targeting a specific amount of imports. So like if the government wanted to only allow 100 imports, that would be why they would use a quota. Whereas a tariff, basically the government's just saying, we're going to slap on an additional dollar to every single good you import. So the main difference is that quotas are very quantity specific, whereas tariffs are much more price based. Okay, the next question someone had, and I believe this was from chapter 3, was asking, so when a country allows trade and exports a good, so domestic producers are better off, domestic consumers are worse off, and the nation is better off because the gains of the winners exceed the losses of the loser. So remember, for any type of trade situation, not everyone in the economy is going to benefit. And for example, when there's exports, what that means is that the world price is actually higher than the domestic price. So domestic producers actually benefit because they can sell their good at a higher price, whereas domestic consumers are actually worse off because now they're paying more for the same good. But then the important piece there is the country overall is better off because the gains from trade exceed the loss that consumers face. So remember, trade is always good for a country. It just doesn't mean that consumers and producers are both going to benefit. It's usually the situation, actually always the situation, that consumers are going to be better off and producers are going to be worse off, or consumers are going to be worse off and producers are going to be better off. So one of them is always going to lose, but the winner is going to benefit more. Okay, this was a question from the chapter 10 pre-lecture quiz. So this question was basically asking, so command and control regulation may be better than a corrective tax if, so usually the only scenario where that's true is if the negative externality is so large that the optimal quantity is 0. And basically all that's really saying is that command and control is good if you want to eliminate something, but if you don't want to eliminate it, then usually a tax gives you a better outcome, because then the market can kind of compare who values the continuation of pollution more. Okay, this question was from the end of the chapter 9 quiz. It basically, what this question's really just getting at is kind of the production possibility frontier. So remember that without trade, a country can only consume along its production possibility frontier. So points A and B are possible, whereas point D is only possible under 2 scenarios. So one is if the country trades. So the country can expand their production possibility frontier. So D is possible through trade. The other way is if the economy grows. So in this case, we're specifically talking about trade. So countries can get outside of their production possibility frontier through trade. And then the final question for this week was something from the chapter 10 pre-lecture quiz as well. So this question was asking, which of the following statements about corrective taxes is generally not true? So the really important thing is, and we talked about this in the lecture as well, but just remember that corrective taxes do not cause deadweight loss because they are fixing a negative externality in the economy. So corrective taxes are basically designed because the current production in the economy is greater than it should be. So the tax is basically just knocking that back to where the consumption production should be. Excellent. Well, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to email me. Otherwise, have a great spring break, and I will see you all after spring break. Cheers.